So Milton Friedman, he was a 1970s Nobel Prize-winning economist, famously said, "The business of business is business." And thank goodness we've moved on from those days, because no business can be functional and successful in an environment that is not precisely that as well. So this time we're putting the social right slap bang in the middle of ESG. So, Jared, I mean, Milton Friedman in the 80s is this guru of economics. And thank goodness we've moved on, because the business of business isn't necessarily just doing business anymore if we're going to be putting the S into ESG.
Yeah, I think so. Firstly, the key thing is for us to move on. And it's been really pleasing and positive to see from client engagement just how clients are actively now focusing on S, not just from a risk perspective. So I think historically, you saw a lot of clients concerned about social factors reputationally, but now you're actually seeing the shift towards opportunity. So you're seeing executives factor in social opportunities into their strategic objectives and looking to grow their businesses while meeting social needs.
What is a social opportunity? Social needs we get, but what is a social opportunity?
Well, let's talk about healthcare. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about how you can leverage resources as a company to actually start contributing to some of these things. I'm not talking about traditional healthcare and education. I'm talking about, for example, employee wellness. Okay, how do you start thinking about the wellness of your employees and how that then drives production and performance from a commercial perspective?
Do we not need to be thinking broader than just the corporate entity, though? Corporates can look after their own people. You get better value out of your people. It's a bit of a cynical view, but if people are healthy and well-balanced, then they're going to spend more time at their desks being productive. That's all fabulous. So what about factors beyond the immediate influence of the corporate entity, of the company itself?
Yeah, community. Yeah. So employees are from these communities around these corporates. So companies are now becoming a lot more focused on recognizing that fact. So there's a twofold opportunity. Firstly, from an employee perspective, if they're focused on assisting the communities around their businesses, they find more productive, more driven employees, and at the same time, they improve their reputation amongst those communities, which for them, from a long-term sustainability perspective, is a positive.
And it's amazing, Beth, isn't it, that 20, 30 years ago, people weren't thinking outside of the immediate box of the corporate. It was all about productivity. It was all about bottom line. It was pursuing profit almost at all costs.
Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly COVID has maybe been a paradigm shift for corporates, in that there's been such a strong recognition that you need a healthy society, both from a literal sense and a figurative sense, for your own long-term sustainability. So I think, some of these ideas were in motion before, but COVID's probably accelerated a lot of this shift. And I think, as Jared said, people are also increasingly seeing the opportunity side of the social. So I think where in the past you've targeted a specific market segment, people are looking for new avenues for growth, and often that's how do you evolve your business model to service underserviced segments. So you're giving access to people who haven't had access to your services before, which is enabling you to grow, but also obviously broadening participation for a far bigger set of stakeholders.
And if your society is falling apart, if your society is vulnerable, if your society is impoverished and hungry and desperate, how can you have a sustainable business for the long term in that environment? You may think your ivory tower is secure and you simply put extra strands of barbed wire around the office park, but really your long-term sustainability is at risk if society is not healthy.
Absolutely. And I think, we're starting to see this conversation with the corporate clients, as Jared mentioned. I think the institutional market also recognizes this from a long-term sustainability perspective. We need to be investing in the social. We need to be ensuring that there's equitable access. And they're willing to support companies to shift in that direction. And I think that's where, sustainable finance and the business that Jared and I work in is an exciting opportunity to sort of play that intermediary role between supply and demand for capital and helping people shift in the right direction to access opportunities or growth areas that maybe they haven't focused on before.
The social element of part of ESG is that kind of the soft stuff. Environment, oh yes, burning planet, it's all very serious. Governance, oh yes, well, we must make sure everybody behaves themselves. The social feels a bit like the soft underbelly, the gooey bit in the middle of the cheesy sandwich. And it's not, because it is absolutely as important as environment and as important as governance, if not more so.
Absolutely. I think to Bet's point, every engagement that we've had with institutional investors, every one of them have highlighted the fact that where's the social? So there's this recognition and awareness that actually social is not soft. Social is key to enterprise growth and long-term valuations. From a business perspective, that's really exciting for RMB because we play that pivotal role in connecting providers of capital with people that need capital. So if institutional investors are constantly asking us about assets that have social at their core, and they're struggling to find it, then as an investment bank, that's a huge opportunity for us from a structuring and arranging perspective.
Now, give me a practical example of how social plays into the funding discussion, Beth.
So we've seen a couple of sort of avenues from a sustainable finance perspective. So there's the specific use of proceeds type instruments, so social bonds. So that's where an entity raises funding that they're specifically going to deploy for affordable housing or access to basic infrastructure, be that roads, water, education. Those issuers have typically been sovereigns or banks because that's kind of the intermediary role that they play in delivering those solutions. But also increasingly we're seeing in the corporate space in sort of the sustainability linked loans or bonds area, where in the past a lot of the key performance indicators that were embedded in those solutions were all climate related. And I think there's no disputing that obviously the ultimate impact of climate change is on people. So that's not to say climate doesn't have a social impact, but rather that there were all these measurable, and I think that's why climate also has sort of been at the forefront. It's very measurable, it's very tangible. But we're increasingly seeing corporates saying, look, we want to include some sort of social metric in those KPIs, and institutional investors also demanding it. And so that might be an internally focused metric like gender diversity or employee wellness, but equally it could be an externally focused metric like how are you increasing the number of lives covered from lower LSMs, or how are you providing access to financial services to people that haven't been before, and pushing corporates to set ambitious targets for growth in those spaces and then actually get some benefit from the funding through achieving that.
So, Jared, don't you get any pushback from some corporates who say, look, we pay our taxes, we are completely compliant, we tick every box that you want us to tick, and now you want us to take care of social imperatives as well?
So, Bruce, we haven't seen any pushback to date. I think corporates are operating with ideals in mind here. They're not being idealistic. And they're also making a shift from corporate philanthropy, which is important, and let me be honest, the more philanthropy we see, the better, okay? But they're making a shift from corporate philanthropy into actually understanding their business models and identifying opportunities. So in their supply chain, they're identifying opportunities where they can support marginalized small entities, and they're looking for a bank like RMB to come up with financial solutions that actually enable them to achieve those objectives.
It's such an important distinction to make, isn't it, Beth? I mean, this idea of philanthropy, we all understand what philanthropy is, but that juxtaposed against the social imperative and social impact is quite an important distinction. Where is that line between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think in the past, a lot of corporates in their sort of report to society have focused very much on their CSI or their philanthropic activities. And I 100% agree with Jared, there's always a place for that. So it's not saying we need to shift away from that. But I think there's been a much greater recognition that businesses have far more than capital available to deliver positive social outcomes. So their business platforms, their relationships, their customers, their supply chain, there's a lot of inbuilt ability in a corporate to actually have a far greater impact than they can with writing a check from a CSI perspective.
This isn't just simply filling in a form and going, yes, okay, fine, you've qualified on those particular points, you can have your S in ESG, well done to you, and pat on the back and off we go. It's fundamentally shifting the life experience in that supply chain.
Yeah, and I think exactly to Jared's point, it's sustainable, it's long-term, it's real impact. But, on the corporate side, it's also good for business. So I think that's where we're seeing the shift from this viewing S as a risk or a compliance type area into actually its real business opportunity and an opportunity for my business to grow, but in a way that positively benefits the community and my broader stakeholders.
You're creating new markets, you're creating new entities that will support you in future as well, because those entities are going to need, in the case of a bank, banking services and advisory services of their own, should they grow to a level where that is required. It's not a trade-off then, is it, between sustainability and business? It's actually quite a nice coalition of forces that are coming together.
Yeah, I was going to add on that if you look at the deals that we've worked on, from a commercial perspective for the bank, the outcomes are really good. Now, the outcomes are also good for the supplier and for the corporate in the ecosystem. So what you have is this real outcome where everyone is benefiting. From a bank perspective, we still generate a good return, we still generate a good value proposition, but we enable the same for the benefit of the supplier, the small business in the supply chain, and the corporate.
It sounds too good to be true, though. And this is the thing, because if it is so easy and so, I didn't say easy, if it's so logical and so mutually beneficial, why is it being treated as something so fundamentally new? Is it a change of thinking, perhaps, a change of heart, perhaps? What is it?
So I would say in response to that, it's probably not very new. I think people haven't been very good at talking about what they have been doing. And, as we were chatting about at the beginning, I think COVID, the riots in July, I think there's just been a greater realization of the need for people to work together and to maybe accelerate what they have been doing on a smaller scale. So I don't think it's entirely new. I think there's an embracing of the concepts across the market. So as Jared said, we talk to the supply side of the market as well as the demand side of the market. And I think there's a lot of alignment there as well, which can only be enabling. Because if people have similar objectives, then it gets you to a solution much quicker.
Are we seeing a fundamental shift in business models, Jared?
So Bruce, it's not easy. I mean, just to add on to Beth, these solutions that we're coming up with, they are complex. And from an R&B perspective, we love operating in complexity. That's where we feel we unlock real
Well, there's no
value.
competition in complexity. Everyone wants an easy way out. And that is, I suppose, the advantage. Tell me about that complexity and what it is that creates these mutually beneficial relationships.
Yeah.
Because I'm curious as to how you go on that path.
So the thing is, we're actually applying skills and methods that we've applied elsewhere. I think that's sort of Beth's point. So if you look at what we've done in the supply chains for companies, the concept of a guarantee. I mean, a guarantee has been used for many years on a number of transactions, but the application on that specific issue to deal the complexity is what we found to be valuable.
Give me a practical example as to how that plays out in your supply chain.
Yeah, so you have a corporate. A corporate is reliant on certain suppliers in their supply chain. Certain suppliers are still in a certain growth phase where they may not be able to access capital effectively. So what a corporate can do is a corporate can provide a corporate guarantee to a financier, and that financier can then go and provide effective capital on really good terms to that supplier in the supply chain. Now, that won't seem that difficult, but it was the complexity behind it and the application of the guarantee that unlocked a solution in that particular case.
Is this corporate social investment? Is this CSI? Or is this more of a strategic CSI?
I think traditionally CSI maybe has played a bit outside the realm of the corporate ecosystem. So it's identified areas that need support and investment that maybe aren't getting enough access to capital, but it's been quite far removed from the core business. And so I think where we're moving is that your ability to have an impact is far greater if you're, as a bank, using your full balance sheet to try and achieve that impact. And so it's becoming far more integrated into what access a corporate has to networks, capital, relationships, talent, and using all those resources to deliver an impact rather than just financial resources.
And so it feels far more integrated. It feels far more intimate. It feels like a far longer term relationship than perhaps a CSI relationship might be.
Yeah, it's definitely beyond CSI. So there's a spectrum of opportunity. So you can start with CSI, but then you can also look at your balance sheet. We've spoken about procurement. We've spoken about supply chains. We've spoken about employees. But then you can also think about customers. You can also think about your different value chains that you as a business can actually go and embed this objective of social outcomes in. So it's an opportunity that transcends your business model if you're comfortable and focused enough to look at it in that perspective.
So, I think at the basic level, the just part of a transition talks to social. So that is saying we recognize from a climate perspective that there are a lot of fundamental changes that need to happen in economies. But all those changes will have people impacts. And so how do you manage that in a way that is equitable to all stakeholders, recognizing that, it's something that needs to change for the long-term sustainability of the planet and of companies and of people, but it needs to be done in a way that's equitable to all participants. And I think what's exciting about the just transition is that it actually is creating a lot of opportunity for us to fix some of the imbalances that exist. And so we need to make sure that we apply that rigor to the just element to make sure that we actually capitalize on those opportunities.
And it also gives us an opportunity to think about how we get stakeholders to participate, right? So we can learn from what we've done in the past. And when we look at this transition into new energy assets, as an example, we can think about how do we get communities to actually own those assets? How do we get people around the physical infrastructure to participate in maintenance of those assets?
And it makes those assets safer, more secure, less likely to be plundered by outsiders coming in, for example, because communities have a very, very clear interest in ensuring that that asset remains in a viable
They're connected. They're connected to the asset. So it's going to open a whole new relationship between businesses and their communities.
Jared, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Beth, very much. And it is a fundamental shift in thinking. Sorry, Milton Friedman, or Milton Friedman's ghost. What you said in the 1980s no longer applies.